Hello and welcome to my major project presentation. I would just like to highlight that I will be submitting the final comic separately to this PowerPoint on Blackboard. Thank you. Initial proposal and idea for final major project was to create 3 separate books/scenes, starting first of all with my project proposal to redesign the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Tmnt. These were the initial experimentations that I had done from primary research from visiting a zoo. During the second week of this project, I discovered from my feedback that the Tmnt rebranding really didn't have a demand and it wasn't a necessity to redesign them, seeing as it's been done so much before. Instead, this inspired me to create my own comic with an original story, as it would be much more interesting to develop. So I began a new project proposal to create my own graphic novel superhero comic. It was much more original and would definitely be more interesting to develop. I looked at a few other favourite films of mine that inspire my illustrations, such as Beetlejuice and Fifth Element. With Beetlejuice, it has an element of surrealism and horror, which I like to translate into my illustrations, and Fifth Element is set in the future, so it gives you a perspective of fashion, vehicles, landscape in the future. These are all themes that I would like to explore throughout my comic. To get ideas flowing, I decided to hold a questionnaire on my art Instagram asking people if they could be any superhero, what would they be? These are some of the results. These results then inspired me to start sketching an initial foundation to what the comic could be based on. These are a few of the results from the Instagram questionnaire. To the left of each portrait you can see an illustration of the human form of the character. Then to the right you can see the superhero version of the character. What I like within my work in particular is how much power a single line has within a portrait to define an expression or characteristics of a character. The impact of a line on a face. I really like my characters to feel real, so these are all based on people that I know, because to me this makes not only visual referencing a lot easier, but it allows me to convey their characteristics and personalities into the characters themselves in the comic. The comic is based on a true story about a xenophobic encounter that I witnessed with my partner. In a short summary, as you can see on the side, he was basically treated differently to me just because he was mixed race. I had never experienced an encounter with him like this before, which is why it was so heartbreaking for me to witness. I couldn't understand why in 2019 when this happened, why racism was still a thing and is still the mindset that people have. I really felt powerless, which is what inspired the storyline to this comic. As you can see by the list on the left is a list of characters and a short summary of how they feel excluded in their life. So the comic is going to be about these rejects of society coming together to form a new society and a new way of life. So I want the comic overall to have a serious underlining meaning, but I also want to have an element of fun, superheroes, make it nice and playful, visually interesting, and communicate a moral of the story overall. For inspiration, I went to some galleries and shops, such as Gosh Comic Shop in Soho, Covent Garden Bookshops, Library in Chelmsford, and Forbidden Planet in Covent Garden. Here I gathered some visual inspiration. Not only was I looking for inspiration for my comic, but I also looked at inspiration for the degree show, how I could create merchandising to go with the comic to hopefully sell at the degree show. As I have been a freelance illustrator for the past 3-4 years, I have a passion for screen printing my own merchandising as well as creating graphic designs on skateboards. However, for my future goal, I would actually like to work within a company designing characters and concept art. But for the degree show, I would still like to express an interest of how to develop merchandising from a product, such as the comic. The feedback that I got from the pop-up shop that I was a part of in Covent Garden at December was that I didn't have enough pulse buys. I really wanted to develop on this because most of the products that I had curated were quite large, which meant it took a lot of thought and consideration into buying into a customer wanting to buy them. So I should have created smaller pulse buys that were easier to purchase quickly and have displayed at the till. So I would like to develop one-off prints that are screen printed by hand to sell at the degree show. This is my first initial rough storyboard. I had the vision for the comic's layout and imagery before I had really finalised a script. While roughly illustrating the storyboard, I had an idea for the script, and I think within my head I can translate from this imagery what sort of language and communication I will add from each character. These are my initial character designs. When I was given feedback from my peers about these characters, the first response I had was that there was not enough diversity shown within the characters. I had been too selective with the characters, meaning that the audience members felt like they didn't have someone that they could relate and connect to within the story. With the theme of the comic being xenophobia, I had to re-evaluate my character selection. Here is some more research I have created about perspective, ways of seeing, script writing, and how to art direct. I have also hand-selected some books that I think are good for revisiting how to illustrate the human anatomy correctly and in proportion. This was my first time ever writing a script. What you are seeing now is the final version of the script that features in the comic. After getting feedback from my peers as well as film students, I'm not very good at academic writing. Whenever I write something, it always sounds like a conversation rather than an actual literacy piece of work. From the feedback that I got, people could see that this was quite a conversation between characters, and I really had wanted to achieve that. After finalising the script, I went back to my storyboard and redefined it. This time adding panels and really looking at the framework and where the camera angle was going to be. This is my visual library full of photographs of each of the characters taken at different angles and perspectives, also looking at different expressions. These people are all people that I see every day of my life, so I worked from the photos from some degree, as well as working in primary, depending on what section of the comic that I was going to be working on. For hand and body references that I didn't pick up on during the photography, I used these manga action figures to position in a way of which I could get the correct perspective and drawing from them. Especially with the hand drawings, I referred to my own hand, or if I needed an expression, I used the mirror and myself to pull the expression to then illustrate firsthand. Here is my personal development for each character. Here are some primary research of the actual pub that the original story is based on. I had more time to illustrate outside the building. I was obviously not too keen nor welcome to go inside, so the interior drawings were quick, rough sketches created in my mind as well as based on the actual interior. Prior to the incident, I had been to this location multiple times, so the environment inside the building was quite familiar to me. Upon visiting again, I noted down types of furnitures, stool, bar taps, clocks, posters, TV. My key aim for my visit was to document in present the resources of which were available to me. As for perspective accuracy, modern technology helped me greatly. On Google Maps, the bar actually has a 360-degree view of the outside and interior of the building. This was great to aid my primary research in the accuracy of the drawing. The final sketches of the bar that you see in the comic are inspired by the original interior, but I also wanted to create my own perspective of the bar, so I didn't include every single detail that was in the original bar, but I simplified it into my own layout and plan. In the actual comic, I ended up reusing the same sort of perspectives of the bar because I wanted the main focus of the comic to not necessarily be the environment, but to be the interaction within the characters. Although I developed the comic digitally, I also initially like to do first-hand sketches on paper using pencil to get my bearings of a perspective or an object, or some hands, for example. From my first-hand drawings, I then like to translate this into digital drawings, ready for the comic's preparation. The same creative process applies for when I am sketching expressions or body language for the character. Here are some observations and transcripts from the Fundamentals of Drawing Anatomy book. I just wanted to experiment here with the human anatomy, different body types and shapes with ages and genders, and I always feel by sharpening up on the traditional drawing skills allows your digital work to be stronger, so this was like a mini exercise for myself. Within my work I really like experimenting with colour. I tried to restrict my palette a little bit more throughout the comic. I've had this idea from the start that everyone's genes that are not going to be affected and people that are non-superheroes will remain in black and white, and people that are affected and people that have mutated DNA will be in full colour even without their transformation into their super mutant character. I did this because I really wanted to emphasise the separation between the people in this society, the separation from mutants and normal people. This colour separation also visually suggests and relates to the original story where my partner was treated differently to me just because of race and colour. So colour is a really key part of this comic for me. Within my creative process I always refer to the colour wheel and to look at complementary colours and what colours are strong against other colours. During my final term at Westminster I have been a part of the mentoring scheme. I've had over 6 months mentoring from Miriam Slime, who is a Westminster alumni who did graphic design and illustration. Throughout the mentoring scheme, I managed to produce a professional portfolio on Behance, LinkedIn and ArtStation, as well as a complete and up-to-date CV. Through the mentoring scheme, I won awards for Westminster Employability, which gets added to your LinkedIn and CV. Miriam has also been another person to view the comic from outside university to give me critical feedback on the graphic design element of how to piece the comic together. Here is some development of the comic being created on Procreate. After printing the dummy book for my Midpoint review, the feedback that I received was very positive. The main feedback I got was to experiment more with the background of the comic. Some people found that the grey was too heavy for the background of the comic and also merged a little bit too much with obviously the greyscale of the characters that are the non-mutants. I also had more feedback to go back and review the expression and gestures in some of the body movement to make sure that they're equal and convey the correct meaning of the narrative. Look at the weight and balance within the character, make it look like the characters actually belong, like they're weighed down by gravity. But overall the rhythm and fluidness of the book was very natural. So here are my experiments exploring backgrounds. My final outcome was just to use a plain white background within the black frame. This was definitely a good choice because I think less is more, and it definitely makes the panels of the comic stand out better. Here are some title experiments on Procreate using a variety of different brushes and tools. This was my selected brush, which was a textured brush. The lines that the brush has, I think, represented the DNA structure to fit well with the comic's theme. On Instagram in particular, there is a community of artists supporting artists. A classic comic is 32 pages long and features at least 10 adverts in. Original comics had really random adverts in it, but I wanted to take this opportunity to support some friends and local artists to advertise their work in here. Enterprise activities. Here are a list of galleries, workshops, commissions, and competitions that I have entered throughout the process of developing this comic. I could not fit all of the commissioned work onto this PowerPoint, so please use the links to see all the work I have created next to the comic book. One of the biggest and most exciting commissions I have had so far is to illustrate a children's book called Arthur the One-Eyed One-Legged Parrot. This is a book that I have mentioned in previous PowerPoint presentations, but it was during the development of this comic that it got published and sold out. Being a freelancer means that I generally have to balance lots of different commissions at the same time, whether they are the same style or not. I think this was a really good example of that, to illustrate something like my comic book, where it's massively detailed and very realistic, against a commission like this, which was the opposite. And I really like this freedom as an illustrator to be able to do that. Here I have attached a link for you to use, which will show you a completed PDF flick book of Arthur the One-Eyed One-Legged Parrot. According to my schedule a few slides back, I had planned to develop the characters into 3D action figures to go alongside the comic in the degree show, as well as screen prints and merchandising ready for, again, the degree show. Due to COVID-19, obviously plans changed. During this time, it allowed me to develop my traditional art skills a lot more instead, as well as developing my online platforms a lot more and applying for jobs via LinkedIn and Behance. It was during this time that I did these traditional sketches that I realised that drawing these characters in blue pencil actually created a lot more natural characterization for each character. I have heavily relied on digital platforms for illustrating my work, with softwares such as Procreate, Affinity and Photoshop, and I realise now that there is actually a lot more originality and natural characterisation within pencil. I think it would have been very interesting to see what the comic would have alternately looked like if I had done it all in pencil. I have definitely taken for granted the fact that you can undo on Procreate and you can restart so easily. And you also have better tools to make your work seem more refined. I printed the comic via an online printing company, and I'm currently selling it on my website and through my Instagram. I released the sale on the 5th of May and have had an amazing response and nearly all sold out. On the actual comic, I also have a working barcode, which takes you to my professional portfolio, which is displayed on my Behance. You can try out the QR code on the PowerPoint. Please also do click on the link to view my shop and website. As for the future of this comic, I hope to develop the prequels to it, looking at the individual characters, as well as a sequel to this, because it does end on a bit of a cliffhanger, to really explore my development in the area of field that I want to go into, which is concept art, character designing or storyboarding. Still do my freelancing as a side job to continue with this. For my final reflection, I am really pleased with how everything turned out, and I am really impressed by the results. I think that I have grown within my traditional skills as well as my digital skills. for portraiture and character development in general. I think story and narrative to the comic was well executed, and I will continue with the other comics in the meantime. Because this was my first proper comic that I have made, I think that my creative process was in a bit of a strange order, and if I had re-evaluated and reorganised my development process, it would have been easier and quicker to finish the final product. I think next time I should be a little bit more experimental with my layout. By this I mean the panelling for the comic could have been maybe a lot more interesting and show a bit more variety from page to page. I think personally I should remind myself and be a bit more clearer and explain the narrative better at certain points within development of the comic. I think the most challenging part of this comic was the fact that it's not an origin story. You're kind of thrown straight into the action rather than having an introductory on each of the characters, which is why I think I'm so keen to develop the origin stories to build this story and franchise. One of my favourite workshops I did was the Blender workshops, and I think this helped me, in my mind, put the characters in a much more realistic space rather than thinking about them on a 2D surface, how they would look physically in the book. Have a bit more of a better perspective in mind of what these characters would actually look like in relation to a 3D space. Obviously this was a part of my original schedule to develop these characters as 3D models. The comic as a whole has definitely been a stepping stone for my career and has helped me develop a bit more of a specialised portfolio to really show what I want to do in the future, so that employers can really understand and see the role of which I'm applying for. I think a lot of my freelancing artwork hides a lot of the work that I'm actually more passionate about. So I think my freelancing clouds sometimes what I'm focused on because I'm always doing other work for other people rather than focusing on my own work and development. More feedback for myself, I think of maybe I could have experimented more with stylization of how these characters appeared. For example, when I was exploring the blue pencil observations of the people that are based in the comic, I discovered a lot more authenticity and natural characterization that came with the blue pencil rather than me relying so much on digital development. Ideally, I had planned to submit the actual physical comic for my final submission, and I would just like to remind you and say that I will be attaching the final comic separately to the PowerPoint in Blackboard. Thank you very much for listening.